So welcome everyone to this very first day of Wond'ry. I'm really excited that you're here with us today. So my name is Deanna Meador, and as Michael said, I'm the Associate Director at the Wond'ry, and I run our Entrepreneurship practice area, which really means that my role really centers around helping Vanderbilt faculty, students, and staff that have ideas, and it's as broad as that. One of my favorite parts of what I do is that one minute I might be talking with the team that's designing the next novel cybersecurity technology, and then the next minute I'm looking at samples for a student team that's designing their own clothing line. It really keeps the variety in there, which I love. So what I'd like to share with you today is I'd like to take a look at an overview of the entrepreneurial programming that we run at the Wond'ry, and then jump into kind of looking at entrepreneurship in the US, just to give you a little bit of context about what we do, and then talk a bit about the influence of COVID on entrepreneurship, and then introduce you to two truly brilliant Vanderbilt entrepreneurs, Ben Taylor and Charleson Bell. So, but before we jump into all of that, I was hoping you would let me tell you a brief story. So there was a graduate student whose husband had just returned from a deployment overseas, really didn't want to go back into his day-to-day military work. So they decided, let's open a business, right? Because it's just that easy. They started doing some research. They had no idea what they wanted to do and really absolutely no idea of how to get there. They started looking at what were upcoming trends, what were products that people were excited about, what were physical locations that might work. And after several months of that planning, they opened their first retail location. Super exciting. And with that, learned many hard early challenges. Things like mall locations will charge you a fine if one of your employees opens a few minutes late or they decide to close up a few minutes early. But in the end, they were able to build a business that grew to multiple retail locations in multiple states. After about a year and a half, they sold that off. And then the wife started doing research, something she had always wanted to do. 3 months into that, saw a lot of inefficiencies in data collection, ended up building a paperless data collection tool for her team, but it got adopted by universities all across the country. Then she later went on to found a fashion technology company and working on a new educational technology that's received about $2.7 million in funding from the National Science Foundation. And so the entrepreneur in that story is me. This is my story. And this is a topic that has truly changed the direction of my life. It's not something that I expected. I didn't set out thinking I was going to be an entrepreneur. I originally wanted to be a psychologist in the school system. So that's where I was coming from. But I didn't have the benefit of a place like the Wond'ry. So I'm really excited to see centers like we have at Vanderbilt popping up at college campuses all across the country so that we have these tools and resources in place to really support this next generation of creators. So at the Wond'ry, it is a place for big ideas. And the way that we do that is through a number of different programs and opportunities, and as Dave mentioned, teaching a process. So I'd like to introduce you to a few of those programs in our entrepreneurship practice area. So have you ever had an idea that you've maybe written on a napkin, you might have told your mom or your best friend, but it didn't really go much farther than that? PreLaunch is a program that we designed to help evaluate these very early stage ideas to try to determine, is there something there worth pursuing? It's about process, it's about controlled risk taking. We've had about 170 teams that have gone through PreLaunch, and among those are teams like Prediction Health. They were the winners that Dave showed in the photo of the 3686 pitch competition in 2018, and they were one of our very first teams to receive venture funding from Mucker Labs. And then we have Stephanie Castillo, who's the founder of Future Doctors. She's really passionate about diversifying the representation in STEM. She recently won the Entrepreneur Organization's pitch competition and then was invited out to pitch in San Francisco. She's going to be presenting on her work today during the poster session, and I know you will find her truly remarkable, so definitely chime in for that. And then once a team has evaluated an idea, they have some evidence built for that is worth moving forward, they can apply to our post-launch program. And post-launch teaches the skills necessary to launch a for or a nonprofit venture. We dig in deeply to things like, what are your revenue streams? What are partners and resources that you might need to get off the ground? What do you need to be thinking about in terms of intellectual property? And this is a program that runs once a year. It supported teams like Nat and Tori with Leaf Global FinTech. They were South by Southwest's best bootstrap startup for their blockchain technology that provides a virtual banking system for refugees. We have an article that'll be coming out about them really recent, that'll be coming out soon. And then we have founders like Crystal with TuneHatch. She graduated from Vanderbilt and she's now running her company from New York, where she connects up and coming artists with fans. And then we became a National Science Foundation Encore site in 2017. So we've been at that for a little over 2 years. And this program is designed to support the commercialization of really deep technology ventures. It provides a $50,000 non-dilutive grant for teams that are working on groundbreaking innovations in STEM. In 2 years, we've had about 20 teams that have received this funding. Teams like our very first undergraduate team with Zeno Power Systems that Dave talked about earlier, they're building this power system that converts nuclear waste into electricity. And these were undergraduates that have now received funding from the Air Force to continue this work. And then we have teams like Armed Cyber. So this is a duo of twin brothers. They have backgrounds with the NSA, the CIA, the White House. I mean, it's just remarkable. And they are building this novel cybersecurity solution. And they just finished up participating in the National Encore program last week. But none of the things that we do in our entrepreneurship practice area would be successful at all without the amazing group of mentors that we've built. At any given point, the Wond'ry has between 40 and 60 mentors, several that I saw are with us today. And these range from intellectual property attorneys to accountants to startup gurus, CEOs, investors, really across a multiple of industries. And they augment the skills of our internal Wond'ry team and provide that expert guidance in just a variety of subject areas as teams are working to develop their ideas. So now that we've taken a look at some of that core programming, pre-launch, post-launch, iCore, the Mentor Network, let's talk just a little bit about entrepreneurship in the US and what makes an entrepreneur. So what is an entrepreneur, right? So people like Mark Zuckerberg, Oprah, Sarah Blakely might come to mind. It might be the faces that you see on shows like Shark Tank, but the term really means so much more than that. It's about lifestyle businesses. It's about people who have side hustles. It's about deep technology ventures. It's about these blue sky innovations that might take decades to develop. It's about serving other people, innovating, creating, inventing, and doing all of that while you're trying to figure out how to make money. So it's about, launching a venture in your garage or your parents' basement. And it's not about having to raise millions of dollars. Contrary to what you see that's often most publicized, that's like the sexy side of entrepreneurship. In fact, over 64% of small businesses or startups, they get started with less than $10,000. And that includes some brands that you know really well. Dell and Spanx, they fall in this category. And then 75% of people that become entrepreneurs, they end up relying on their own savings, at least initially, to get their venture off the ground. But entrepreneurship is fundamental to economic growth. Over the past decade, since the financial crisis, the number of new businesses has been steadily increasing again. So we've been experiencing this really healthy period of growth for entrepreneurial activity. And that's led us to where the US is now ranked number 3 in the world for entrepreneurship. So this was as of last year, 2019. This yearly scoring that US News and World Report does of countries, they take these 9 areas, and of that, 18% of a country's score is driven by their entrepreneurship score. It's the highest weighted category of all 9 that influences that overall for a country, which I think illustrates the importance of entrepreneurship and how it can really be a driver and propel a country's economy forward. And so within these numbers that we've looked at, that steady incline that we've been seeing over the last decade, that over 51% of people who start in a garage or basement, there's generally two types of entrepreneurs. Those that are driven by necessity and those that are driven by innovation or opportunity. So in the US, we see about 70% of the entrepreneurial activity is driven by opportunity, which means that someone finds an opportunity, they find an area that's ripe for disruption, and then they build a company around it. Versus necessity-driven entrepreneurship, which we generally see is more prevalent in developing countries. But in times of crisis or recession like we're seeing today, this type of entrepreneurship starts to rise also in developed countries. As people lose positions or their lives change dramatically, we see larger numbers of people starting their own endeavors out of necessity. So thinking about this shift, this entrepreneur opportunity versus necessity-driven entrepreneurship, I thought maybe we could take a quick look at some of the early impacts of COVID-19 as it relates to business and entrepreneurship. So, we looked broadly at the state of entrepreneurship. So I'd like to think about, what impact has COVID-19 had on what was, a vibrant entrepreneurial landscape, right? We were seeing that upward trend. So if you're like me, I have a number of alerts that are set up on my computer to bring me articles about entrepreneurship and innovation. And in March, my feeds suddenly started to look like this. Rarely were there any headlines that were coming through that didn't reference the current crisis. So March was when we started to get the first glimpses of some of the challenges that COVID was going to present, not just for entrepreneurs, but also for the population as a whole. As of yesterday, there's 36 million unemployment claims that have been filed. This is over the last 2 months. We've had social distancing in place, depending on where you are, for just a little over 70 days. And then the estimates that we were starting to see come out at the end of March were that the US economy was standing to lose about $4 trillion in revenue due to the coronavirus. Some of the biggest business or workplace challenges have come from decreased sales. We've seen a lot of supply chain challenges and staff shortages, both due to illness and also due to having to care for children, other challenges like that have come up. And we saw that many businesses didn't have funds set aside, actually more than half of them, to last more than 3 months at the maximum. New York State, for example, they saw over 65% drop in new business startups during March. That was higher than after 9/11 and higher than right after the financial crisis in 2008. Some roles and industries have obviously been impacted more than others. Sales positions have been some of the highest affected, as well as anything in the leisure, travel, hospitality industry. But where you have big challenges, right, you also have big opportunities. So one thing that we're seeing, this unemployment rate, it is declining. States are reopening, and while we don't know what the actual losses are going to be, we're seeing some early signs that it might not be as extensive as that predicted $4 trillion that we saw at the end of March. We've seen some really interesting innovations move forward. We've seen telemedicine becoming more prevalent. We've seen distilleries pivot and start doing hand sanitizer. We have a Vanderbilt alum named Carly, who's with a business called Laws of Motion, and she makes professional wear for women. I saw an article about her last week that she's now the largest hospital gown supplier in the state of New York. So completely changed what they were doing, but were able to fill that need. And I think that all really comes down to entrepreneurship being a skill set, not just about starting a company, and it's about using your skills to serve other people. Okay, so as of this week, we've got 37 states that have been fully reopened, with another 10 that are in some phase of reopening. And so kind of regardless of how you feel about people being back out in public, we are in this together. We're learning together what it's going to take to reopen, to remain safe while we do that, and to recover. And I don't think anyone has it figured out, but the next few months and years are going to require not only patience, but also periods of constant reflection and periods of revision where we reflect on what we're doing, revise, and then we go back and try something different. And yet with all of these challenges and uncertainties about what the next few months are going to hold, new ideas can be born, and they can find a place even in a recession or crisis. For example, HP, they were founded in 1939, which was during one of the largest recessions in the 20th century. It was a time where the GDP had dropped almost 19%. Walt Disney incorporated Walt Disney Productions in 1929, which was right as the Great Depression was getting started. And they survived, but they didn't launch their first full-length animated feature until right after the Great Depression ended. So these challenges, these periods, they can actually be fuel for driving innovation. And throughout what we've seen so far with COVID, there's some things that have certainly changed, but there are others that remain largely the same when it comes to starting a venture and trying to get something new off the ground. So certainly, I think the funding landscape is going to be different. We were already starting to see a shift in this direction even prior to COVID. We saw several less than ideal IPO outcomes for once, unicorn companies. I think this is going to further amplify a shift in funding availability, but also in the scrutiny that companies are going to face when they're seeking funding. It's going to take us some time to get those unemployment numbers back where we'd like to see them. We're now being expected and in some cases required to wear a mask, which is something, for most of us, we have never had to do before in our lives. And that changes the way that we interact with others, I think in ways that we may not even realize yet. But, if you want to launch a venture or you've recently gotten a business off the ground, there's some core kind of fundamental principles that have not changed. There's some habits that really help to foster that entrepreneurial mindset that can set you up for success that are still the same as they were before. So one of those is being able to find a unique contribution. So now's the time for businesses to rise that really solve pains. Businesses that involve gain creation are going to be harder, but they're generally harder even without a crisis. Making connections is still just as important as it always has been. The acceptability of a handshake may be gone for a while, and we're starting to, learn how to understand muffled voices underneath masks. We're trying to learn how to master Zoom, but that need to connect with people is still critical for anyone starting or running a business. It's still just as important to learn as much as you possibly can, especially if you're trying to open a business in a space that isn't an area of expertise for you, which is what I did. Learning as much as you can about that space and about the people who live and occupy that space is critical. And then thinking about where you want to go and where you want to be. It's better to be, one of my favorite quotes, it's better to be at the bottom of a ladder you want to climb than on the top of one you don't. Starting a company is really hard. It's filled with lots of sleepless nights and disappointments. And so you have to make sure that you can see a path ahead of you that you actually want to go down. And then lastly, mistakes are integral parts of a journey. That's true. You're going to have to learn from them. You're going to have to learn quickly, and make sure that through that you're engaging mentors and people that can steer you away from them, minimize them, or also just, help you course correct afterwards. So before I bring up these two brilliant entrepreneurs that I promised you at the very beginning, I want to do just a really quick recap. So we started with an overview of the Wond'ry's programming, that programming we use to support aspiring entrepreneurs. We took a quick look at entrepreneurship in the US and a few of the impacts that companies and startups have seen due to the coronavirus. And then we looked at a couple core principles that really have not changed since all of this started. So now it is my great pleasure. I'm going to switch over. I want to introduce Ben Taylor. He's a Vanderbilt 2015 grad. Ben founded his company Doorport about a year after graduating from Vanderbilt, and he managed to pull off the acquisition of that company to alum.com at the beginning of March, right as COVID was beginning. And then we also have with us Dr. Charleson Bell. So Charleston is a biomedical engineer and a triple door. So this means he has 3 degrees from Vanderbilt. He's an inventor, he's a patent holder, he has multiple entrepreneurial ventures going on at any given point in time. including some that are addressing critical challenges related to COVID. So I'd love to welcome Charleson and Ben. I really appreciate them taking time out and joining me today. We may or may not have time for your questions for them during this session, but both Charleson and Ben, as well as myself, we're going to be in that entrepreneurship networking session that starts at 1:30. So if you want to get some individual time with them, definitely come back to that. So Charleson, do you want to say hello to everyone?
Hey everybody, how you doing?
And then Ben.
Hey everyone, good morning. Nice to join all of you.
Okay, excellent. So I have several questions that I put together for both Charleson and Ben, but I was hoping first, Charleson, let's start with you. Will you give everyone just a very quick rundown of the ventures that you have going on right now?
All right. Okay, you said quickly. Well, first of all, I'm a research assistant professor at Vanderbilt in biomedical engineering. That's my core basis is nanotechnology. But honestly, being a biomedical engineer meant that I had to learn multiple different aspects of engineering and new ways to employ them. And because of that, you know, through my entrepreneurial journey, that led me to devise a number of different innovations that are outside of biomedical engineering. One of my companies is a medical device company that I may talk about, you know, in the session later. And basically what we do is we diagnose bacterial infections or detect bacterial infections 96 times faster than is currently possible. The other two companies, one is a media distribution company called Flash Crystal. And basically it's a small crystalline device that you can touch to your phone and immediately download full portfolios, full albums, full anthologies, and every interaction is tracked. And then the third one I'm currently putting a lot of effort into right now is Stroll. And Stroll is basically a real-time personalized companion app that when you go and explore a new city or a new area, basically based on your mood and based on your interest, it serves up information, content, and deals to you in real time. So the screen scrolls while you stroll. And in all three of those ventures, we're actually starting to look to include COVID-related solutions so that we can all move back to a life that is profitable, promising.
Okay, thank you so much, Charleson. And then for Ben, will you give us a quick, couple sentences about what is Doorport?
Yeah, so Doorport is designed, we build software and hardware that makes existing apartment access smarter, meaning you can use a code, your phone, some non-physical object to unlock building entrances, building doors, apartment doors, and ultimately make access easier for deliveries, friends, and the people living there.
Excellent. And so when you left Vanderbilt in 2015, Ben, what were your plans? And then when did entrepreneurship really become a part of that picture?
Sure. So I knew about halfway through my time at Vanderbilt that I wanted to start a business at some point. I had a friend of mine who was working on a startup at the time, and I was fascinated by it. He introduced me to the world of entrepreneurship. So I knew I wanted to start a company at some point. I just didn't know what I wanted to start, which I think is probably the more difficult part of starting a company. It's easier, I think, to know that you want to start one. It's hard to know what to start, because I think a lot of ideas seem obvious or seem great on the surface, and there's reasons when you dig down why they're not as great. So during my time at Vanderbilt, my senior year especially, I worked on a few ideas, but ultimately I don't think that they had that much potential. So I kept toying with different ideas on the side. If I had an idea for an app, I try to mock it up. I did this many, many times, probably 5, 10 plus times over my senior year at least. And then it was a few months into my job after college that I first had the idea for Doorport. At the time it was slightly different, but it was still focused on making apartment access better. As I looked into that industry, I realized that there was a lot of potential for innovation. The companies that were building products were decades behind. And so I started working on Doorport not too long after I graduated, but it took me about 15 months from that point to when I started working on it full time.
Excellent. And I'm excited to dig more into that with you. So, but then going back to Charleston for a minute. So Charleston, you were the first, I believe, graduate student at Vandy to receive venture funding. So kind of how did that come about? And then what was that idea that you were working on?
Yeah, so quickly, it was related to the idea about the bacterial infections. Like I said, I was in graduate school, I was working with nanotechnology, and basically there was an offering from some venture capitalists in Memphis that were looking for innovative ideas that could be taken to market rapidly. And so my first thought was a diagnostic, but at that time I was working more on therapy. So I did my thing where I thought about it for a second and I put it in the back of my mind and let it marinate. And then one day, literally, I was getting out of the shower and I stepped foot on the ground and it said, wait a minute, instead of trying to detect bacteria themselves, which takes so long, you have to grow them, what if we just detected what they release in real time? And what bacteria do is they release these molecules that they use to communicate. All we have to do is use our nanotechnology to do some reconnaissance. And so decoupling, actually needing a bacteria to do the detection was what was revolutionary to all the doctors and physicians that I spoke to and the infectious disease professionals I spoke to. And then I thought, since I came up with the idea and it wasn't anything that had to do with what I was doing at Vanderbilt, that I had it. Well, they let me know that that wasn't the case. So we had a meeting with the tech transfer and they said, hey, look, let me take a quick step back. I went ahead and submitted the idea thinking it was mine to the venture capitalists. And then we heard from the venture capitalists a month later saying that we want to put some money into the company that you're starting based on this technology. And then all of a sudden I was starting a company. And then all of a sudden Vanderbilt was like, wait, we need to get the patent in place. We need to do all this stuff. So it was about a month and a half of commotion before I went to Memphis and started an accelerator based on that venture capital funding.
Excellent. Okay, so I want to go back to Ben for a minute, because there's a funny story that I've heard before about kind of how you acquired your first customer. So I'd like for you to talk about that, and then with the time that we have left, move us into how you managed to get acquired really during COVID.
Sure. Yeah. So I was building the first Doorport product on the side. The original idea was building an iPad app where you can mount an iPad at the building entrance and use that as the intercom to get access to the building. As I was building this, I reached out to the people who were managing my building. I said, hey guys, I pay you every month to live in your building. Can I show you this thing that I'm building on the side that's relevant to your industry? So within a few weeks, I got a meeting with the head of property management for that company of the building that I lived in, sat down with them and showed them this very early prototype of what I was building. They asked me a bunch of questions about, can it do this? Can you manage it in this way? These were questions that I hadn't really thought through because I was really building this at the time from my perspective as a user, as a resident, less so as a property manager. So this was a lot of customer discovery during this first meeting. And then at the very end of the meeting, Erica, who's the head of property management, said, okay, this looks great. We'd love to put this in our next building that we build. How much does it cost? And this is something that I hadn't really thought through fully prior to meeting with her, because I didn't really expect this conversation to happen at this point. So I just threw out a very round number that I thought sounded good. I said $1,500 up front. She said, okay, how much is the monthly service on this? Because there would be a monthly service charge on it. And again, sort of trying to pull a number out of the air that seemed round and appropriate, I said, $50 a month? She took out her calculator and she did 50 times 12 times 10. Basically, in her mind, what mattered was what was the 10-year cost on this. She said, oh, okay, perfect. We shook hands on it, and that's how I got my first customer. Turns out I severely underpriced it in both directions. But it was, I think the value I gained from that meeting the most was really, it was the first deep dive into understanding what my buyer wanted. Because in the market that Doorport works in, we have a buyer who is the manager of the building, and then we have the residents who live in the building who use this every day. And so in scenarios like that, you have an interesting balance of building products for the buyers, as well as building products for other users of the product, and balancing the feature set there and making them both happy.
So we're going to have to, I just got a message, we're getting the shepherd's hook pulled out on us. So we'll have to save the rest of this for that entrepreneurship breakout session that's going to happen at 1:30. So I'll have Charleson and Ben in there with me. They're both absolutely intriguing. So definitely join us for that so you can hear more from them. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.